Lives are at stake. Morning came. Honestly, I didn't want to wake up at all. The first thought that crossed my mind was my sick sister and the game I had signed up for. I checked the time and realized that the wake-up call would happen soon. Getting out of bed, I went to wash my face. In the mirror, I saw the most exhausted and sorrowful face I had ever seen. But my grim thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the sharp sound of a siren. The doors to the rooms were about to open. We stepped out and lined up. This time, there were only half as many people left. Empty, hollow eyes stared into nothingness, hands trembling at their sides. The grim reminder of yesterday's game, that merciless slaughter, haunted the room like a ghost that refused to leave. The cold, mechanical voice from the speakers shattered the silence, ordering everyone to head to the hall for lunch. The hall was just as filled with food as before, but the atmosphere had shifted. No one rushed toward the tables with hunger anymore. Players sat down quietly, avoiding eye contact, as if afraid that meeting someone's gaze might drag back memories of the horrors they'd witnessed. No one cared who sat beside them. They were just trying to endure. I spotted the old man I had partnered with during the first round. His face was calm, but carried a weight behind the eyes, a quiet grief. I sat beside him, forcing a polite greeting. "Good morning." "Ah, good morning to you too," he replied with a weak smile that barely touched his lips. "How did you sleep? Nightmares?" "No, I'm fine," I lied. The old man glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the pale, haunted faces. "Do you see them? All these people looking like ghosts?" Of course, who could feel anything but misery after what happened yesterday? Everyone just wants this nightmare to end. It's pure hell. The old man slowly turned his head to face me. To my surprise, he smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only a dark, chilling amusement. "Hell," he whispered. "Believe me, soon, you'll see how their faces will change." Moments later, the host entered the hall, dressed in a pristine white jumpsuit that seemed untouched by the horrors of the previous day. Instantly, the entire room fell silent. Forks clattered against plates as everyone stopped eating, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of fear and anticipation. He stood there, savoring the tension before finally speaking. "Attention, everyone." His voice echoed with authority. "In 1 hour, a vote will take place. If the majority votes to stop the game, it will end immediately. However, if the majority votes against stopping, the game will continue. You will cast your vote through your bracelets. The voting function will become available in 1 hour." A chilling pause followed. Then, a synchronized vibration pulsed through the room. Every bracelet buzzed at once. The screens on their wrists flickered, revealing a single number, 200,000. The host continued, his voice calm and calculated. "What you see on your bracelets now is your current earnings after completing the first round. After the second round, this sum will increase." Suddenly, a middle-aged man from the back of the hall shot to his feet, his voice trembling. "By how much?" The host tilted his head slightly, eyes as cold as ever. "That depends on the number of survivors. Right now, each of you has $200,000 credited to your account. The balances of eliminated players are reset, and their money is distributed among those who remain. So, if half of us survive the next round, my balance will double?" The man pressed further, his voice laced with a mix of disbelief and dread. The host nodded, lips curling into a faint, mechanical smile. "Precisely." Without another word, he turned on his heel and left the hall, his footsteps echoing like a final punctuation mark in the heavy silence. The room was silent, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Everyone seemed lost in their own minds, processing the host's words. Suddenly, a young man who had been remarkably calm until now stood up. His voice was sharp, almost challenging. "Hey, why stop now? I can see it. This game has scared you all, but look at yourselves. You survived. You're not lying in a body bag like those losers. $200,000? That's nothing. I need at least 400,000 to make a difference. Let's be honest. We're all here because we're desperate. If we weren't, we wouldn't have signed up for this. This money isn't enough for any of us. But if we make it through just one more round, one more terrifying day, we could each walk away with nearly $500,000. Isn't that worth the risk?" Before he could finish, a bold-looking woman cut him off, her voice sharp with defiance. "I already earned my money and stayed alive. I won't risk my life again. I never signed up to put my life on the line like this. My life is worth more than any amount of money." Out of nowhere, the old man spoke up. His voice was calm, but laced with a dark undertone. "Your life?" He let out a dry chuckle. "Tell me, what's your life really worth? You're, what, 30? How many years do you have left? 40? And how will you spend them? In debt, struggling, watching your loved ones suffer? In 10 years, you'll regret not taking this chance. Better to risk it all once more and finally live with dignity. We're all here for the same reason: debt, sick children, desperation. This is our only way out." I was stunned. Until that moment, I had been certain everyone would vote to stop the game. But now I wasn't so sure. Doubt crept in, and I knew I had to speak my mind too. "There are other ways to make money." My voice echoed through the silent hall, my pulse pounding so loudly it felt like everyone could hear it. "You don't have to die for this. You've placed money above everything else. But think, what if you die? Or worse, what if half the people here end up dead because of your choice?" I scanned the faces around me, hoping my words would reach someone, anyone. But the only thing I saw was tension. Cold, hardened faces. And then, the young man who had encouraged everyone to continue stood up abruptly. His eyes burned with rage. "Hey you," he snapped, voice sharp as a blade. "What's stopping me from killing you right now?" "Don't think it would be that easy," I shot back, my heart racing as adrenaline surged through my veins. I didn't speak again after that. There was no point. One by one, people voiced their opinions. Some were desperate to stop the madness. Others, especially those pushing to continue, spoke with a dangerous edge. Aggressive, angry, as if already embracing the bloodshed. But all the noise died when the hour ran out. A group of figures in black jumpsuits entered the hall, assault rifles in hand. Their presence was suffocating, their movements precise and calculated. "The time for persuasion is over," one of them announced in a cold, mechanical voice. "The vote will proceed with no further influence allowed." The voting was over quickly. It seemed everyone had made up their minds with unwavering certainty. From the ceiling, a large monitor descended slowly. The room fell silent as the results appeared on the screen. 26 for, 22 against. Just a few votes short of stopping the game. But there was still hope. After the next round, we might have another chance to sway the votes. We just needed stronger arguments. There were 48 of us left. Or were there 50 before? The thought lingered in my mind until I saw them. The black-suited figures entering the hall with a stretcher. They silently approached one of the tables and carried away a man who had collapsed. Right. I had forgotten about the injured from the previous round. Some of them were barely holding on. Others probably wouldn't make it much longer. My thoughts were interrupted by the host's voice, sharp and commanding. "Form into 4 pairs and proceed to the next hall." "Teaming up again?" the old man asked, his voice calm but with a glint of something unsettling behind his eyes. He was clever, too clever. I had to be careful not to become a pawn in his game. I nodded. We were partners again. Soon, a man and a woman approached us. They looked around 35 years old. The man, wearing the number 057, was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with quiet strength. "How about teaming up?" he suggested in a low, steady voice. The old man and I exchanged a glance and nodded. Yes, this guy could definitely be useful. We moved together toward the hall, where a small token was handed to us, along with a gesture toward the elevator. Just like before, but this time, the elevator didn't descend. It ascended. When the doors slid open, we stepped into a long, bright corridor. The walls were covered in children's drawings. Cheerful suns, stick figures with wide smiles, colorful houses. It felt strangely comforting for a moment. Almost innocent. But deep down we both knew. Whatever came next, we far from child's play. We entered the room marked with our assigned number. What I saw caught me completely off guard. It was a spacious area, resembling a massive kitchen. Fresh fruit was everywhere, large and small, piled on tables, shelves, even scattered across the floor. Vibrant, ripe, and colorful, as if freshly delivered from a market. At the center of the room stood a massive juicing machine, industrial, gleaming, with a wide funnel on top and an intricate mechanism beneath. But what disturbed me most was one of the walls. It was entirely made of glass. On the other side, an identical room mirrored ours perfectly. The same fruit, the same juicer, the same sterile setup. And there, too, stood a group of participants, their confused expressions mirroring our own. In the other room, behind the glass, stood another group of participants. 2 young men, a girl in her early 20s, and a tall, muscular man. He was bald, covered in tattoos, with a hard, calculating expression. It was obvious, this man had a criminal past. He seemed like the type who had carefully chosen his team, selecting people who could be easily sacrificed if the game demanded it. Our team, in contrast, felt calmer. No aggression, just quiet tension and wary glances exchanged between us. Suddenly, a mechanical voice echoed from the speakers, cold and emotionless. "Attention, participants. Your task is to collect as much liquid as possible. In the corner of the room, there's a large hose. You must pour as much juice into it as you can within 30 minutes. The team with the most liquid collected will win. You have 30 minutes. The game begins now." "Cut the fruits into pieces," the old man commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. "Use the knife for the harder fruits. Peel off the thick skins. Grapes and berries straight into the juicer, no waste. Careful with every drop," I added, scanning our team. Every bit of juice matters here. We got to work instantly. The room filled with the steady rhythm of blades slicing fruit and the low hum of the juicer. The only other sound was our focused breathing. 5 minutes passed in near silence, just the sound of our task echoing around us. Then I noticed something. The other pair in our group, the man and woman, kept glancing toward the glass wall, watching our competitors. Anxiety was building in their eyes. "Focus on our task, not them," I said firmly but quietly. "Stay on track." Finally, we finished pressing our first batch of juice, 3 liters. I carefully lifted the container, and we poured it into the large hose in the corner. Suddenly, a screen lit up on the wall. The number flashed in bold white digits, 3,000 milliliters. Moments later, the opposing team mirrored our action, pouring their juice as well. We all watched as their monitor displayed 2,900 milliliters. We were ahead, but only by 100 milliliters. A lead that could vanish in seconds. We continued working, even faster than before. The fact that we were slightly ahead gave us a surge of confidence. If we kept up this pace, we could maintain our lead. The key was not to get too comfortable. "Did you vote to continue the game, or to stop it?" the young woman suddenly asked, her voice calm but curious as she kept slicing fruit. "I voted against continuing," I replied without hesitation, focusing on my task, though the question made my pulse quicken slightly. "Yeah, I remember," she said with a gentle smile. "You spoke out pretty strongly back there." "I voted to keep playing," the old man chimed in with a mischievous smirk, clearly enjoying the tension. Then the man from our pair spoke up, his voice lower, softer. "My wife and I, we voted to continue as well." His words were heavy, tinged with quiet sadness rather than conviction. It made me pause for a heartbeat. I knew everyone here had their reasons, but his tone, it made me wonder. "Why?" I asked, glancing at him with genuine curiosity. "We need the money for our child's treatment," the man finally said, his voice low and strained, as if each word was carved from pain. He kept slicing the fruit, avoiding eye contact. "That's why we chose to stay. Risking our lives, it's nothing compared to losing our only child." The words hit me harder than I expected. My grip on the knife tightened, a lump forming in my throat. I understood them far too well. I was here for a similar reason, wasn't I? I came here for my sister, desperate to save someone I loved. But the difference was, I had already earned the amount I needed. They hadn't. Could I really judge them for choosing to stay when their pain was still so raw, their hope so fragile? Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the rhythmic sounds of our work. Knives cutting through thick flesh, the steady hum of the juicer, the soft dripping of juice into the container. The sweet scent of crushed fruit filled the room, almost cloying now, as if the air itself was too thick with tension. Minutes passed. Finally, we had collected our next batch of juice. 3 full liters. I lifted the container carefully, both hands steady, making sure not to spill a single drop. As I poured it into the hose, the screen on the wall lit up again. 6,000 milliliters. We exchanged glances. It was more than I had hoped for. But then I noticed movement behind the glass. The opposing team had just finished pressing their next batch as well. I couldn't help but watch as the large, tattooed man grabbed their container. His massive hands gripped it tightly as he dumped the juice into their hose. The numbers flashed, 2,600 milliliters. We were still ahead. "Keep it up, guys. We're pulling ahead," I said with forced enthusiasm, hoping to keep the morale high. No one responded. The girl stole a glance toward the other side of the glass. The tattooed man was watching us now. His lips curled into a slow, cold smirk. There was no fear in his eyes. The game was far from over. The fruit supply was almost gone. We worked quickly, moving in near-perfect rhythm as the timer ticked down. 15 minutes remained. We threw ourselves into juicing the last of the fruit. The berries were long gone, only the larger, tougher fruits were left. Each slice, each press was careful, ensuring not a single drop was wasted. Finally, we collected the last batch, 2 liters. I lifted the container carefully, keeping my hands steady, and poured the juice into the hose. The monitor on the wall updated, 8,000 milliliters. Around the same time, the opposing team finished their batch. The tattooed man poured their final juice into the hose. Their monitor flashed, 7,700 milliliters. We were ahead by 300 milliliters. We had beaten them. That was it. There was nothing left to juice. Both teams had run out of fruit. All we could do now was wait for the game to end. But the true nature of this game was just beginning to reveal itself. Across the glass, the tattooed man suddenly exploded with rage. His face contorted with fury as he grabbed one of the young men by the head and slammed it violently against the glass separating us. A thick red smear spread across the surface. The boy collapsed, unconscious from the impact. But the nightmare wasn't over. The tattooed man grabbed a knife, the blade flashing cold and sharp under the lights. Without hesitation, he sliced through the unconscious boy's throat, severing the artery. A jet of blood sprayed from the wound, and with disturbing precision, he directed the flow straight into the juice container. "What the hell are they doing?" The woman beside me cried out, her voice trembling with shock. "This is the real game," the old man muttered coldly, his eyes fixed on the scene. "No one will accept defeat. No one." We watched in horrified silence. The second young man, visibly shaking, assisted the tattooed man, though it was clear he had no choice. Meanwhile, the girl in their group had broken down, sobbing uncontrollably as she hid beneath the table, unable to watch. The tattooed man quickly filled a liter with the boy's blood and poured it into their hose. The monitor flashed. Their total now read 8,700 milliliters. They had overtaken us, but it wasn't enough for him. He lifted the lifeless body onto the table, tilting it slightly so the blood would continue to drain straight into the juice container. We had to act. Fast. "Guys, listen," my voice cracked under the pressure. If each of us gives just a little blood, it should be enough to catch up. We don't need much." Silence. Then the old man let out a dry, bitter laugh. "A little?" He shook his head, eyes narrowing. "That won't even come close. We'll just bleed out and die right here before the game ends." "He's right." The older man spoke next, voice heavy, filled with restrained pain. He clenched his fists, struggling to find the right words. "We need to make a hard decision." The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on all of us. "My wife and I are here for our child's treatment," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "If I give enough blood now, it will be enough to surpass them. But on one condition." He took a deep breath. "After this round, you'll each give my wife $100,000 and vote to stop the game." I glanced at the old man. His face remained still, but there was a glimmer of cold satisfaction in his eyes, as if he had expected this moment all along. The man's wife broke down, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her hands together. It was painful to watch, but we had no time. In that moment, we all agreed to the madness. 1 minute. "I need to say goodbye to my wife," the man whispered, his voice strained but steady. He turned to his sobbing wife and wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if trying to imprint the feeling of her touch forever. He whispered something into her ear, and her quiet sobbing turned into full, uncontrollable cries. Across the glass, the tattooed brute was watching us with a cruel grin. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing, then dragged his thumb slowly across his throat, a mocking gesture as if to say, "You're already dead." "Enough. Let's do this," the man commanded, his voice colder now, determined. We pushed the juicer and fruit remnants aside, clearing the table. He lay down, letting his head hang slightly over the edge so the blood could flow directly downward. The old man grabbed an empty container, holding it firmly with both hands. "Promise me, you'll keep your word," the man whispered, his eyes locked onto ours. "We promise," the old man and I said together, almost in unison. Without hesitation, the man dragged the blade across his throat. Blood surged forth in a thick, violent stream. I instinctively pressed my hands to the wound, trying to control the flow, but it was impossible. The blood pulsed, warm and relentless, splashing onto the table and my hands. The old man held the container beneath the wound, filling it quickly. The dark liquid hit the 2-liter mark. Without wasting a second, he rushed toward the hose and poured the blood inside. The monitor blinked. We had tied with the opposing team, but it wasn't over yet. The old man returned with the empty container, and we resumed collecting more. I cast a glance through the glass at the other team. The bald executioner was consumed with rage. He had just killed the small, skinny boy and barely collected any blood. It wasn't enough. Time was running out, and their loss was becoming obvious. He exhaled sharply, scanning the 2 remaining players. The young man and the girl pressed themselves against the walls, trembling, trying to stay as far from him as possible. Then, with no warning, he lunged at them, the blood-soaked knife gripped tightly in his hand. The young man, realizing there was no escape, pulled out a hidden knife, his hands shaking as he took a defensive stance, desperate to resist. The girl grabbed the juicer from the table, struggling to yank the metal blade from inside. She held it out feebly, her hands trembling. The executioner moved with brutal speed. Roaring with fury, he rushed the young man. The boy slashed weakly, barely grazing his shoulder before the blade sliced across his throat. Blood sprayed violently as the young man clutched his neck, choking, and collapsed lifelessly onto the floor. The girl's arms dropped to her sides. She didn't even try to fight, but the executioner had already turned his focus elsewhere. He knelt beside the boy's body, sliced deeper into the artery, and began collecting the blood in the container. But time was not on his side. Our teammate's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. We collected another liter of blood and poured it into the hose. The monitor flashed as the milliliters updated. At the same time, the tattooed executioner did the same, emptying his container. But we were still ahead. 15 seconds left. Realizing his defeat, desperation twisted his face. He lunged at the girl, aiming to slice her throat so the blood would spray directly into the hose. But he was too late. The blade only grazed her neck, leaving a deep gash when a loud buzzer echoed through the room. The hose sealed shut with a metallic cap. The game was over. Our room was suddenly flooded with a green light. Victory. The other room remained silent. But only for a moment. The door to their side opened and several figures in black jumpsuits entered, rifles raised. Without a word, they opened fire. It was unbearable to watch. For us, the door simply slid open. "Congratulations, participants. Please exit the room." The mechanical voice echoed coldly. The woman who had just lost her husband stood pale as death, trembling uncontrollably. I walked up to her, gently placing my hands under her arms to support her. We left the room in silence. The hall was quiet. Only 12 of us remained. Half were wounded, some clutching their sides, others leaning weakly against the walls, arms freshly bandaged. "All right," I muttered, my voice barely audible. "We just have to wait for the others, then they'll send us to the showers." At that moment, the voice from the speakers echoed again. "All participants, gather in the center of the hall." The door opened, and figures in black jumpsuits entered silently, lining the walls like shadows. One stepped forward and spoke with mechanical calm. "Follow us to the showers." We obeyed without a word. Is this everyone left after the second round?" I asked, my voice trembling as the reality sank in. The figure in black nodded. "Yes." Understanding the full horror of the situation, I fell silent, following the others without question. The showers were eerily quiet, no one spoke. Only the sound of water, washing away blood and fear, echoed through the space. Afterward, they provided food. Simple portions. No one complained. We ate in silence, avoiding eye contact, each of us lost in our thoughts. Once we finished, they led us back to our rooms. I was certain now, tomorrow, everyone would vote to stop the game. To be continued. If you liked the story and want a sequel, give it a like and subscribe to the channel.